My name is David Deverall. I'm the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at Perpetual Limited. Perpetual is a diversified financial services company with a very proud 122-year-old history, where we have been given the responsibility of looking after the wealth of generations of Australians, for generations and for many generations to come. Perpetual is a diversified financial services organisation. And our heritage is quite a proud one. We've been around for 122 years and we started life as a trustee organisation. So the central role that we play in people's lives is acting as almost like a fiduciary. So we look after other people's money as though it was their own. And so we talk about Perpetual as saying our job is to basically protect and grow the wealth of Australians so that they can have peace of mind in their retirement. And that's simply what it is that we're about. My role as Managing Director is to essentially oversee all of Perpetual's operations. To put it simply, the buck stops with me, and I am the nodal point or the central point of basically all decision making. I don't make all the decisions, but in terms of the responsibility of the company, all attention comes to me. So when I think about my role, I really try and divorce myself from being the person who's making all the decisions, because that's impossible and also inappropriate. However, there would be a few roles that I would specifically carve out for myself. The first would be that I talk about myself as being the chief strategist in the firm. So that means I'm the one that has to essentially own the strategy and, most importantly, communicate that strategy to all of our stakeholders. The second aspect of my role that I refer to is that I'm the chief human resource manager. And I say that because Perpetual as an organisation has very few assets on its balance sheet. Our primary source of intellectual property is our people. And so my role is, one of my most important parts of my role is to make sure that my people, who are talented individuals, are able to come together and work together effectively as teams to deliver great outcomes for our clients. I think the role of the strategist within the business community and within organisations does go through cycles. And those cycles vary according to essentially the economic conditions that we're in. I've seen this over many cycles myself, where in tougher times, the role of the strategist becomes a more tactical, a more practical, a more pragmatic role, which is essentially chief executives and boards saying we need to reduce our cost base by 5, 10, 20%. Can you help us think strategically about that particular process? So nobody needs advice as to how to put on a hiring freeze, for example, but if you're really looking to change your cost base quite significantly, the strategist can be quite helpful to make sure that as you make those changes, it doesn't impact your core underlying strategy. So that's certain parts of the cycle. You then move to more back to the boom times when things are going along really well, and the role of the strategist moves well away from the cost style approach and managing your expense base, but actually starting to think about some big strategic gambles that the organisation might be thinking of playing on the broader chessboard in the market environment that they're looking at. So this is where having input into mergers and acquisitions become a more important role of the strategist. So I think the strategist needs to be astute enough to understand the nature of the cycle that we're in, so that they can therefore become relevant to the organisations that they're either working for or consulting to. The thing that makes the financial services industry a little bit different to other industries, not all, but a little bit different to others, is that they are essentially all very much people-based industries. We don't have large amounts of capital tied up in property, plant and equipment, for example. For most financial services firms, capital that is employed is the intellectual type of capital. And so what that means is that for our industry, we are able to, and I think the good players are able to very quickly respond to changes in our market environment and then effectively deploy our teams to make the most of those changes. In terms of the major stakeholders, they will vary according to the type of business that you're in. But if I think of an organisation like Perpetual, I have a series of very important stakeholders. The first one, of course, are my customers. And to really understand them and have an intimate relationship with them is really, really important. Within an organisation like Perpetual, probably the second most important stakeholders are my staff. The people that actually come together and deliver the intellectual property or deliver on my source of competitive advantage. In my business, obviously as a public listed company, my shareholders are a critically important set of stakeholders. And for me, I need to discern between, and I spend a lot of time discerning between my actual shareholders who are with me and the rest of my board and staff on a long-term journey to build wealth for Perpetual versus stockbroking analysts who provide a lot of the noise around an organisation like Perpetual. And you have to be able to discern between the two, but nevertheless, they all form that broad group of people known as shareholders. Also within Perpetual, a hugely important segment or a stakeholder that we really need to make sure that we're close to is government. Because a lot of the industry that we're involved in, which is around superannuation, which provides the nourishment for our business both now and into the future, is a function of government policy. Then you move into other stakeholders, the media, a very important group of stakeholders in any organisation, particularly a public listed organisation. And then there's a whole group of people that I call, in my less pleasant tones, I would call them busybodies, but they're people that have a view on an organisation like Perpetual or our industry, and they will use websites, they'll use the media, they'll use lobbying capabilities, whatever it is, in order for their voice to be heard. And we need to engage with those people in order to make sure that our voice is being heard too with all those other stakeholders. These might be people that have a view as to the way in which the superannuation industry should evolve over time. They are independent observers, and they may not be necessarily directly part of the industry, but they will shape policy in superannuation. And for example, those people could be academics who have a heartfelt view about the way in which the Australian society should evolve and the role that superannuation should play part of that. You also have consumer groups, such as Choice. They have a lot to say about the nature of our industry and the way in which our products and services are delivered. You have other groups as well who might represent shareholder groups, so the Australian Shareholders Association. They're an important group as well that I would put into that category too. When I think of strategy, I'm thinking of choices. That to me is essentially what strategy is all about. What choices are you going to make around your business? I mean, quite frankly, it can be around your personal life as well, but let's talk about it in a business context. What choices are you going to make? And it's the choices about really the scope of activities that you're planning on doing. So what are my particular chosen product segment, customer segments, geographical segments I'm going to participate in? And then most importantly, having made those choices, have a really justified and verifiable reason as to why you think you're going to be successful in those chosen segments. So make those choices, but then have a really good understanding of what it is that allows you to compete better than the next guy. But at the end of the day, it's about how you're going to play the game and what makes you think you're going to beat the next guy at that game. It's as simple as that. And you apply it to business, you can apply it to your personal life, you apply it in the sporting field as well, but that's the essence of strategy to me. The strategy is very much a dynamic beast, if that's the right word, for an organisation. The environmental is always changing for organisations. So, and those organisations could be sudden events that take place, or those things that impact strategy could be part of a broader cycle. The key thing is that strategy is highly dynamic, and the essence or the critical role of a strategist is to work out and to discern between the importance of the event or the importance of the cycle, and is that a really important event, is it a really important cycle, or is it just an interesting event, and an interesting cycle. The differentiation between the important and the interesting, I think, just comes from judgment and experience. When there is a discontinuity in the market environment, for example, here we are in November 2008, and we're in the midst of the most significant financial crisis most people think since the 1930s. With that, there are going to be some profound changes to the environment in which we operate in. So from Perpetual's perspective, the way in which we adjust our strategy is that we will use a board meeting. We have about a dozen board meetings throughout the year, but we use the next board meeting to come back to the board and describe the way in which the environment has changed. We then sit down with the board and say, we go through an exercise of discernment. Has the environment changed temporarily, or has the environment changed permanently? If it's changed temporarily, then our strategy doesn't change. We might make some tactical measures to improve certain things. But if we discern that the environment has changed permanently, we don't wait for the next strategic planning cycle to actually start to get onto things. We start to craft and adjust our strategy immediately. It comes back to some of my observations that I was making earlier, that strategy is a highly dynamic beast, and that you can't rigidly sit there and just look at strategic plans done once every year or once every 2 years. You've got to make sure that it's a very dynamic process. In terms of the early part of my career, yes, we were all given the textbooks at the time, and here we're talking the 1980s. So we're talking about people like Michael Porter and Kenichi Omai, and also I remember some of the learned teachings of organisations such as the Boston Consulting Group that had developed some quite useful frameworks for thinking about strategy. And for me, they were some of the fundamental underpinnings of the essence of strategy. Since that time, as I've spent a lot more time actually in the business of practicing strategy, of implementing strategy, I've learnt more from the mistakes I've made, quite frankly, than I have from textbooks. The strategy making process at Perpetual is a blend of what I call the top-down, in other words, the centre, and I'm in the centre. We have a relatively small group of people in the centre of the business, but they help coordinate the whole of the exercise. So that's the top-down. And we blend that with what we call the bottom-up. And the bottom-up, these are the critical people. These are the people who are at the front line of everything that we do at Perpetual. These are the ones who are competing with the competitors, the ones that are dealing with the customers, the ones that have a really strong understanding of the drivers of profitability, and the ones that really understand what your capabilities are or aren't and how they should evolve. And then what we do is, through a process that we run over a series of a number of months, we run a series of, to call it loosely, broadly, workshops with those people to bring them together, to bring essentially the pointy heads from the centre together with the tough nuts from the business. And with that process, we craft an overall strategy at the business unit level for those business areas. Then we bring that all together at a corporate strategy level as we look to bring together and make some sense of the various different types of business units that we've got, so that when we go to the board some months later, they can not only get an understanding of what our overall corporate strategy is, but to get a sense as to our business unit strategy, and then hopefully through that get a really strong and profound belief that the strategy that we're coming up with, particularly at the business unit level, is one based on really strong understanding of the competitive environment, the customer environment in particular. When thinking of your strategy and you're trying to work out what information do you need in order to craft a strategy, one of the frameworks that I learnt many, many years ago that I still use now, it's a very simple one, and it's just called the 4 C's. And it's actually 3 C's and another letter as well. But the first C is your competition. You've really got to understand your competition. Not just a matter of who they are and what products they've got, but really what makes them successful. And so that's a fundamentally important part of that, because you should never underestimate or overestimate your competition when you're actually out there in the world of business. The second one is your customers, and understanding, a very deep understanding of what your customers are looking for, what your customers like about you as an organisation, what your customers like about your competitors as well. And then what you're trying to also do is, in terms of understanding customers, is working out where are they heading towards, how are their needs evolving over time. So that's the customer side of things. The third side of things is your what I would call your profitability. It's often called the third C is costs, but it's actually more about profitability. So what are the drivers of money making in the business segment that you've chosen to participate in? Pricing issues, the cost base. What's the basis of driving your building your cost base up from ground zero? What's the fixed variable split between those costs? Again, back to pricing, what are the volume trends? In terms of revenues, what are the volume trends and what are the pricing trends occurring there? So that's the third C, but it's actually a P. And then the final one is your capabilities, which is what do you need to be good at in order to succeed in this particular business space? And with a good understanding of your customers, of your competition, of your profitability drivers, and of the capabilities required to be successful, if you can have a good firm grasp of all of that, you will, by definition, come up with a pretty good strategy. Ultimately, the strategies we use would be underpinned by an overarching strategy for the whole of Perpetual, and then it would be the way in which you tactically deploy your activities to meet the needs of those particular stakeholders. Take, for example, our reputation with our customers. Perpetual has a very strong brand reputation, but that brand reputation hasn't been built up through mass advertising. Our brand reputation has been built up through, effectively, word of mouth among people that really influence customers, namely financial planners. And so, from our point of view, from when we think about executing our strategy, we need to make sure that we continue to nourish that particular brand reputation amongst financial planners. And what we then do is deploy all the weapons in our armoury in order to have an influence on the financial planning community, which will mean, for example, using the media or working with the media to make sure that our position on certain things is well understood, so that when the financial planners are reading the media, a particular type of media that they look at, they can see the way in which Perpetual is being involved in these sorts of things. It can go right through to the type of activities that we might do from, for example, a philanthropic pursuit. Perpetual people are very keen to be involved in charitable endeavours, and what we look to do is to try and make a linkage between those charitable endeavours that we do and making sure that those key stakeholders, for example in this case the financial planners, are aware of the activities that Perpetual are doing in the charitable space. And all that helps to reinforce people's overall sense of the brand of Perpetual being a trustworthy organisation, a committed organisation, a caring organisation. So that's one little small sub-branch of the way in which we would execute our strategy as part of that process. I have very rarely used management consultants in the strategy making process at Perpetual. And the reason why that's the case is that sometimes when you bring an external person in to assist you with your strategy, people can then end up delegating, or even worse, abdicating responsibility for the strategy to the strategy consultants. And one of the absolutely most important or fundamentally important parts of crafting a strategy is that people take ownership for it. And so you really want your own people taking ownership for that strategy. When I think of board composition, what I'm looking for is a diversity of experience. So for an organisation such as Perpetual, we look across and we actively go through this. We look at all the skills that we need to assist Perpetual in crafting its strategy, then executing its strategy. So you're looking for people who are very, very good at the audit process, because they're crucially important in your audit committee. You're looking at people who've been CEOs before. But you don't want all of your board to be full of CEOs. You want enough number of people that have been CEOs. You're probably looking for people who are very good lawyers, because from time to time you can get yourself in some legal situations that require someone that's got very good instincts when it comes to the law. You're probably also looking, again from a Perpetual perspective, at someone that's got very good linkages into government, so that when government-related issues, and as government is an important stakeholder in Perpetual, you need to make sure that they can give you a good sense as to the way government is thinking. So you're looking for those blend of experiences and skills. If all fails on that and everybody's at the board level is still scratching their head as to what they're doing, maybe that's when you call in some outside help to assist you on that. But a strategy is often only as good as the paper it's written on. And if that is the end point in your strategic journey, then you've utterly failed. The core to strategy is all about the communication, and even communication itself only goes part the way. You only really understand that your strategy has been communicated effectively if you see behavioural change among the people that are actually out there executing the strategy. So there's three key parts. You've got to craft it, absolutely essential. You've then got to communicate it, absolutely essential. But you can't stop communicating it until you can actually see people changing the way in which they do things. And that's actually a very hard process. And one of the lessons that I've picked up over time too is that you know that your strategy is being accepted and you know your strategy is being implemented only when you are heartily sick of talking about your strategy to all and sundry. Because it's only until you're heartily sick of that actually it's probably pervaded every corner of your organisation. What I in particular really like to do is spend a lot of time breaking down the language to the simplest possible level. And when people start talking about the latest phrase or terms they've learnt in the textbook, we don't throw it out, but we try and deconstruct that back down to just some fundamental languages of the fundamental language of business. You walk into an organisation and say, "Hi, I'm from strategy," you immediately put offside 98% of the people because you speak a different language. You tend to be dressed in expensive suits, have shirts made in London, and you've probably got an MBA from a fancy business school. So immediately you've just put most of the people offside because there's an air of superiority that comes with you. And that means that chance of actually implementing the strategy has gone down hugely because no one's going to listen to you at the end of the day. Your success, you'll develop a lovely strategy and it'll be communicated upwards perfectly and the board will be very happy, but you'll have had no cut through further into the organisation. The single most important advice that I would give a student of strategy is to understand that strategy has three hugely important components. One is the strategy itself. The second part is the communication of that strategy, and the third part is to observe behavioural change as a result of that communication. If you haven't got all three pieces done, you've wasted your time. And for many of us, we are very happy with the elegant strategic solution. But I can assure you through my own experiences, some good, some bad, that is not the outcome of strategy. You're only happy with your strategy once you can actually see it being implemented. And when I go to bed at night, I can assure everybody that I've had both a very predictable and totally out of control day all at the same time.